Book 1, Chapter 1 of Michael Strogoff, Courier of the Tsar. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by David Leeson. Michael Strogoff by Jules Verne. Book 1, Chapter 1 A Fete at the New Palace. Sire, a fresh dispatch. Whence? From Tomsk. Is the wire cut beyond that city? Yes, sire, since yesterday. Telegraph hourly to Tomsk, General, and keep me informed of all that occurs. Sire, it shall be done, answered General Kissoff. These words were exchanged about 2 hours after midnight, at the moment when the fete given at the New Palace was at the height of its splendor. During the whole evening the bands of the Preobrazhensky and Pavlovsky regiments had played without cessation polkas, mazurkas, schottisches, and waltzes from among the choicest of their repertoires. Innumerable couples of dancers whirled through the magnificent saloons of the palace, which stood at a few paces only from the old House of Stones, in former days the scene of so many terrible dramas, the echoes of whose walls were this night awakened by the gay strains of the musicians. The Grand Chamberlain of the court was, besides, well seconded in his arduous and delicate duties. The Grand Dukes and their aides de camp, the chamberlains in waiting and other officers of the palace, presided personally in the arrangement of the dances. The Grand Duchesses, covered with diamonds, the ladies in waiting in their most exquisite costumes, set the example to the wives of the military and civil dignitaries of the ancient city of white stone. When, therefore, the signal for the polonaise resounded through the saloons, and the guests of all ranks took part in that measured promenade which on occasions of this kind has all the importance of a national dance, the mingled costumes, the sweeping robes adorned with lace, and uniforms covered with orders, presented a scene of dazzling splendor, lighted by hundreds of lustres multiplied tenfold by the numerous mirrors adorning the walls. The Grand Saloon, the finest of all those contained in the New Palace, formed to this procession of exalted personages and splendidly dressed women a frame worthy of the magnificence they displayed. The rich ceiling, with its gilding already softened by the touch of time, appeared as if glittering with stars. The embroidered drapery of the curtains and doors, falling in gorgeous folds, assumed rich and varied hues, broken by the shadows of the heavy masses of damask. Through the panes of the vast semicircular bay windows the light, with which the saloons were filled, shone forth with the brilliancy of a conflagration, vividly illuminating the gloom in which for some hours the palace had been shrouded. The attention of those of the guests not taking part in the dancing was attracted by the contrast. Resting in the recesses of the windows, they could discern, standing out dimly in the darkness, the vague outlines of the countless towers, domes, and spires which adorn the ancient city. Below the sculptured balconies were visible numerous sentries, pacing silently up and down, their rifles carried horizontally on the shoulder, and the spikes of their helmets glittering like flames in the glare of light issuing from the palace. The steps also of the patrols could be heard beating time on the stones beneath with even more regularity than the feet of the dancers on the floor of the saloon. From time to time the watchword was repeated from post to post, and occasionally the notes of a trumpet, mingling with the strains of the orchestra, penetrated into their midst. Still farther down, in front of the façade, dark masses obscured the rays of light which proceeded from the windows of the New Palace. These were boats descending the course of a river, whose waters, faintly illumined by a few lamps, washed the lower portion of the terraces. The principal personage who has been mentioned, the giver of the fete, and to whom General Kissoff had been speaking in that tone of respect with which sovereigns alone are usually addressed, wore the simple uniform of an officer of chasseurs of the guard. This was not affectation on his part, but the custom of a man who cared little for dress, his contrasting strongly with the gorgeous costumes amid which he moved, encircled by his escort of Georgians, Cossacks, and Circassians, a brilliant band, splendidly clad in the glittering uniforms of the Caucasus. This personage, of lofty stature, affable demeanor, and physiognomy calm, though bearing traces of anxiety, moved from group to group, seldom speaking, and appearing to pay but little attention either to the merriment of the younger guests or the graver remarks of the exalted dignitaries or members of the diplomatic corps who represented at the Russian court the principal governments of Europe. 2 or 3 of these astute politicians, physiognomists by virtue of their profession, failed not to detect on the countenance of their host symptoms of disquietude, the source of which eluded their penetration, but none ventured to interrogate him on the subject. It was evidently the intention of the officer of chasseurs that his own anxieties should in no way cast a shade over the festivities, and, as he was a personage whom almost the population of a world in itself was wont to obey, the gaiety of the ball was not for a moment checked. Nevertheless, General Kissoff waited until the officer to whom he had just communicated the dispatch forwarded from Tomsk should give him permission to withdraw. But the latter still remained silent. He had taken the telegram, he had read it carefully, and his visage became even more clouded than before. Involuntarily he sought the hilt of his sword, and then passed his hand for an instant before his eyes, as though, dazzled by the brilliancy of the light, he wished to shade them, the better to see into the recesses of his own mind. "We are then," he continued, after having drawn General Kissoff aside towards a window, "since yesterday without intelligence from the Grand Duke?" "Without any, sire, and it is to be feared that in a short time dispatches will no longer cross the Siberian frontier." "But have not the troops of the provinces of Amur and Irkutsk, as those also of the Transbalkan territory, received orders to march immediately upon Irkutsk?" "The orders were transmitted by the last telegram we were able to send beyond Lake Baikal." "And the governments of Yeniseisk, Omsk, Semipalatinsk, and Tobolsk, are we still in direct communication with them as before the insurrection?" "Yes, sire. Our dispatches have reached them, and we are assured at the present moment that the Tartars have not advanced beyond the Irtish and the Obi." "And the traitor, Ivan Ogareff, are there no tidings of him?" "None," replied General Kissoff. "The head of the police cannot state whether or not he has crossed the frontier." "Let a description of him be immediately dispatched to Nijni Novgorod, Perm, Ekaterinburg, Kasernov, Tiumen, Ishim, Omsk, Tomsk, and to all the telegraphic stations with which communication is yet open." "Your Majesty's orders shall be instantly carried out." "You will observe the strictest silence as to this." The general, having made a sign of respectful assent, bowing low, mingled with the crowd, and finally left the apartments without his departure being remarked. The officer remained absorbed in thought for a few moments, when, recovering himself, he went among the various groups in the saloon, his countenance reassuming that calm aspect which had for an instant been disturbed. Nevertheless, the important occurrence which had occasioned these rapidly exchanged words was not so unknown as the officer of the chasseurs of the guard and General Kissoff had possibly supposed. It was not spoken of officially, it is true, nor even officiously, since tongues were not free, but a few exalted personages had been informed, more or less exactly, of the events which had taken place beyond the frontier. At any rate, that which was only slightly known, that which was not matter of conversation even between members of the corps diplomatique, 2 guests, distinguished by no uniform, no decoration, at this reception in the New Palace, discussed in a low voice, and with apparently very correct information. By what means, by the exercise of what acuteness had these 2 ordinary mortals ascertained that which so many persons of the highest rank and importance scarcely even suspected? It is impossible to say. Had they the gifts of foreknowledge and foresight? Did they possess a supplementary sense which enabled them to see beyond that limited horizon which bounds all human gaze? Had they obtained a peculiar power of divining the most secret events? Was it owing to the habit, now become a second nature, of living on information, that their mental constitution had thus become really transformed? It was difficult to escape from this conclusion. Of these two men, the one was